Well, hey, it's sure good to see you. Glad you are with us today. We're kicking off a brand new series. Today, my name is Josh. I'm the pastor here at Church on the Drive. If we haven't met yet, I would love to get to meet you sometime after service. You are here. If this is your first or maybe your second time here, I want to let you know you're here on a great Sunday because we are kicking off a new series that we're calling The Gospel According to My Favorite Bedtime Stories. I've been looking forward to this series for a long, long time. Because haven't you noticed throughout your life, if you're a follower of Jesus, you end up finding God in all sorts of places, don't you? Like if you really look and you can find God in all sorts of places, with people maybe that you didn't expect to find God with there, in situations where maybe you didn't expect to see God. I mean, things like you're watching a movie, right? You're watching a movie and suddenly there's this theological truth there, this little theological nugget, and you say, hey, I think I've heard something like that in church before. I think I remember that from that Bible verse my grandma used to tell me all the time. Or maybe you're at a sporting event. I spend a lot of times at high school football games, and maybe you see some kid just get laid out. I mean, some kid just gets laid out, and he's sitting there, and he's kind of hurt, and he's embarrassed, and this other kid from the other team walks over and just like puts his hand out and says, come on, man, you got it. Like that level of sportsmanship. There's something in that you say, hey, that looks a little bit like God to me. That looks a little bit like God to me. Or maybe you've seen somebody else. They give like the shirt off their back for somebody else, or they pay that single mom's rent or whatever else, and you say, that looks like God to me. You didn't have to go to church to see God there. You can see God in all sorts of places, including in places like bedtime stories. So as I became a father a few years back, I started having to read bedtime stories to my kids. And I started saying, hey, look, there's some theological truths in here. So what I want to do for the next few weeks is look with you at a few different books that I've been reading my kids that I say, man, there's some theological nuggets in there that teach me as much as they teach my kids. So I can pause and I can point out to my girls like, hey, this is a little picture of God for us, and I can journey along with them in some of that. So the book we're going to look at today is called How to Catch a Mermaid. How to Catch a Mermaid. And it's a great book, man. Now, because of copyright stipulations and our lack of reading Rainbow budget, we won't be showing you the entire book. And I'm not even going to read you the entire book. It's pretty quick, but I will suggest it to you. I think there are some really great things that you could get out of this if you wanted to go and buy it. It's not super expensive. I have no idea how this ended up at my house. I don't know where it came from. Maybe a book fair. Maybe somebody gave it. I don't know. But this is a great book. It starts off with this little girl, and she's sitting on a beach, and she says, I think I saw a mermaid yesterday, and now I'm going to catch her. Because being friends with a mermaid would be this incredible, incredible thing. And I think we'd all agree with that. We can all identify that it'd be incredible to be friends with a mermaid and get to see that side of the sea. But she says, I'm going to catch her. I'm going to catch her. And then she looks around and she sees this boy with his dog, and she says, hey, I want y'all to be on my team. We're going to get this mermaid. We're going to catch her. We're all going to be together, and we're going to have fun with this mermaid. And they say, we're in. Not the dog. He just kind of barks. But you know what I mean. All right, so they start laying out these traps. And one of the traps they lay is they take this really shiny crown, because mermaids love really shiny things. And they put this shiny crown on a rock, and they place a net over the top of it, and they're going to just wait. And when the mermaid comes up and creeps up to get this crown, they're just going to drop the net. They'll capture her. Then somehow they'll become friends. It'll be weird, but it'll happen. Except it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen like that. Instead, this mermaid uses her seaweed lasso, and she gets this crown. They don't really see the mermaid. They just see the seaweed lasso. And they pull the seaweed lasso in, or they pull this crown in. And it's at this point, if you're a parent and you're reading the story, you start saying, wait a second. I know what's going on here. This is just the writers of the book trying to lay it out for the kids that you use your imagination on the shore, on the seashore, and out in life. You use your imagination. You can imagine these majestic, fantastical things happening. But as a parent, as an adult, you're a little bit more cynical and jaded, and you say, what's really happening is there's this natural explanation for what's going on. There's this really natural, logical explanation for what's going on. Seaweed kind of came up with the tide, pulled the crown back in. That's the explanation. Well, the girl and the boy and the dog, they keep laying these traps. They find this giant clam, and they place a shiny necklace inside the giant clam. Well, somehow, while they're gone, the mermaid comes along and quickly replaces the pearls, the necklace here, inside the clam with a rock that weighs the same amount. You've seen this in like 24 or something like it, some show or some movie, right? And you, real quick, switch. Clam doesn't shut. Mermaid gets away with the pearl necklace. Now, here it is again. How did this happen? How did this happen? I don't understand. And they keep over and over and over again throughout the book trying to set these traps. And the mermaid somehow thwarts their plans and gets away. And they always get these glimpses of the mermaid. They never really see the mermaid, but the mermaid kind of swims off, and all they see is like a shadow of the mermaid or something like that, or the mermaid stealing the crown. It can be kind of like that with God, can't it? It can be kind of like that with God. We think we can grasp a hold of God. We think we've got all of this stuff figured out about God. We start working and we spend time thinking, and we dive into the Bible, and we go read all these theological books, and then we go listen to all these pastors, and then we go listen to all these other pastors who aren't our pastor, but they're really famous, and so we go listen to them, and then we get involved in these small groups, and there are these really smart people over there who are really well-versed in all of these things, and we start developing our theologies, and we think we've got God figured out, and we can make it all make sense, and then boom, something happened that totally disrupts our view of God. Totally flies in the face of our understanding of this God. And when that happens, it can lead you to a few different places, can't it? When that happens, it can lead you to a few different places. One of them can be confusion. One of them can be anger. One of them can be disillusionment. Say, I'm done with this. I thought I had it figured out. Now I'm just gone. I'm done with it. I'm not even trying this anymore. A lot of times it can lead us to questions like, what does God want me to do? It can lead us to questions along those lines. Well, I really like when we talk about God and when we're thinking about who God is and what God is, kind of like this mermaid, we need to say this, that God is a mystery. God is a mystery. We need to start there. And when we talk about God being a mystery, what we need to say is this, that we don't mean it in the same sense that we always use that term. And when we say mystery, a lot of time what we mean is confusing, hard to figure out, enigmatic, something like that. I like what Pope Paul VI said when he's defining it. He defines mystery as this, a reality imbued with the hidden presence of God. When he's talking about a theological mystery, he's saying it is a reality imbued with the hidden presence of God. Well, we know what that means, right? Even if you don't know what imbued means, which I had to look up. Even if you don't know what imbued means, you know that God's fingerprints seem to touch all these things. When you start looking for God and seeing all these, you start going, wait a second, I see God there. I see God. We're talking about a reality that's imbued with this hidden presence of God, that God is always there. God is always among us. God is somehow there. And I keep trying to see these glimpses, or the fullness of God, but all I'm getting are these quick glimpses. I'm getting these fingerprints. I'm getting the tracks, the evidence, the traces of God. And like I said, when you keep looking for this full picture of God and it gets smashed, or what you think you figured out, your entire theological framework kind of shatters at one point, or your understanding of the world, your worldview kind of gets shattered at some point, and it's built around who you expect God to have to be, that can lead you in a lot of places. One of the questions you'll ask is, what does God want? What is it that God could possibly want from me and from you and from us? What is it that God wants for this world? Another question you find yourself asking is it a sin to do this? Whatever it is it a sin? Is that a sin? Is that a sin? Or what you're doing a sin? Probably a sin. Not what I'm doing. I do the right things all the time. All that. Right? And then the next question is, does God even care? Does God even care? Does God care about you? Does God care about me? Does God care about those orphans in third world countries who are starving to death right now? Does God care at all? These are the type of questions we start asking when we've defined God and then God defies our definition. the problem with trying to define exactly who God is and believing you have God all figured out. God is other. Now, if you've ever walked into a little bit of deconstructionist philosophy or theology, you maybe have heard this phrase before. Maybe you've heard it around. It's become a buzz phrase lately. What we mean by God is other is that God is very, very different from us. God is very, very different from us. So when we talk about in deconstructionist frameworks, when we talk about the other, we mean somebody who is very, very different from us. In fact, so different that we almost can't possibly comprehend them. So an easy way is to say, God is spirit, we are flesh. God is immortal, we are mortal. Or maybe if we start wrapping our mind around it like that, we understand like God sees things from a totally different perspective than us, because God isn't just immortal, God is eternal. That means there has never been a time when God wasn't, and there will never be a time when God is not. You and I, we've got like this time, this is all we remember. And I can't even remember most of that. And only by the grace of Jesus, by the grace of God, will I ever be able to count myself immortal. We are other from God. And trying to figure out someone who is other is very, very difficult. One of the things I think we have to understand is that we're not the first people to try to figure God out. We're not the first ones to sit around and think about God and say, I wonder why God doesn't do this. I wonder why God doesn't. Like, we're not the first ones. Sometimes we fall victim to our own chronological part of history, don't we? We start acting as if we're the first ones to come in contact with these questions. But the truth is, 2,000 years ago, there were people living in castles and in houses who that's all they did was think about the divine. That's it. They thought about the gods or God. They thought about how God was supposed to be, what God was supposed to do. This is all they did. I mean, St. Augustine in the 400s, that's what he does. That's literally what he does. And he's sitting around thinking about things that you and I have never thought about and classifying them in ways that you and I never could classify. It's incredible. Go back even further to people like Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. They're thinking about the nature of reality in ways that maybe you and I never have. People have long wondered what God is like because God, the divine, it's so mysterious. Even followers of Jesus wondered what God was like. On his last night with his disciples, Jesus had dinner with them. He sat down with them around this Passover meal, and they were talking, and everybody's having a good time. He had just washed their feet. It was kind of weird for everybody, but whatever. And he says, hey, I want you to know that one of you has betrayed me. So, of course, everybody looks around, and they say, wait a second, who? No way. And nobody really gets him to say it was Judas. But next thing they know, Judas has kind of gone off, and he's somewhere else. And they're like, where'd Judas go? I don't know. And they said, I guess he had to go pay a bill or something like that. Who knows? He's always disappearing. And Jesus keeps talking to him, and he says, one of you has betrayed me. I'm going away. I'm not going to be with you much longer. In fact, this is the last night. I won't be with you much longer. Well, this is obviously upsetting to 11 guys sitting there who've been with him for 3.5 years, day in, day out. I mean, they probably slept right next to the man as they camped out under the stars. They were always with him, saw him do incredible things, and they fully expected him to come and redeem Israel and kick out the Romans, these Roman foreign occupiers, to set Israel back on its rightful place as God's people in the world. And they expected they were going to be generals and governors and whatever else, that they were going to be in charge. And Jesus says, yeah, I'm going away. I'm going away. And Peter, his right-hand man, says, well, where are you going? I want to go too. I want to go too, Jesus. In fact, I'll go with you anywhere. I'll go with you even if it means I have to die. I will follow you anywhere. And Jesus says, as you probably know, Jesus looks back at him and says, you're going to go with me even to death? You're not going to make it through the night without denying me 3 times. How could you possibly follow me to the place I'm going and follow me to death? He says, no. You can't go with me. None of y'all can go with me right now. But don't worry. I'm coming back for you. I'm going to prepare a place for you. And if that weren't true, would I have told you that I'm going to do that? Don't worry. Don't worry. I'm going to prepare a place for you. I'm going somewhere for you. And then he ends all this comfort that he's given to his disciples by saying this. He says, you know the way to the place where I'm going. Oh, okay, sure. Haven't really told anybody where he's going yet. He just says, I'm going to prepare a place for you, but guess what? It's okay. You know the way to the place where I'm going. So this means it's a temporal place, an actual location. So one of his disciples asked the next logical question. He says, Lord, we don't know where you are going, so how can we know the way? You haven't told us where you're going. Hint, hint. Where are you going, man? Where is it that you are going to go? Where is this place that you're telling us that we've got to go eventually? We can't come now, but that you are going right now. Where is that place? Look at Jesus' response. Jesus answered, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Now, let's pause there. Because if you've been around church for a lengthy period of time, you've probably heard this verse used before. And I would bet you've heard it used to bludgeon people who don't agree with your theological beliefs. Specifically, people of other religions. So I want to acknowledge there's a little bit of baggage there. Maybe you've heard it. Maybe it offended you at some time when somebody used this. But I want you to watch what's happening. I've even underlined this for you so you can see what exactly the emphasis of this verse is. So when Jesus answered, he's talking about a place. Here's what he says. I am the way. I don't know the way to go, Jesus. Where are you going? I am the way. If you want to know where to go, follow me. I am the way. And he's the way because he's the truth of God and the life of God is in him. They go hand in hand, but the emphasis is on the way. And he's going to the Father. So if you want to get to the Father, Jesus is the way. That's not to discount the good things we see in other religions and in the people who practice other religions. There are good things there. But if you want to get to God, if you want to get to the Father, you got to go through Jesus. You got to get to Jesus. That's where it all starts. And Jesus doubles down on this. He goes on. He says, if you really know me, you will know my Father as well. If you really know me, you're going to know the Father. See, here's the problem. A lot of us, we want to call ourselves Christians. We want to call ourselves followers of Jesus, but we don't really know Jesus. And we haven't really tried to know Jesus. And we're left wondering why our experience of God seems so flat and sterile and stale. You want to know the Father, you need to know Jesus first. You got to start here. Get to know Jesus. You'll ultimately know God. From now on, though, he says, you do know him and have seen him. Why? Because I'm him, he says. He says, I'm God. This is Jesus telling, like pushing them along. I'm God. Letting them know. I and the Father are one. Now, that's a lot to take in, especially if you're one of the disciples. That's a lot. Like, last thing you knew, this guy was just walking on water and healing people and feeding people and saying all these incredible things. Last time you checked, this guy was coming in to start a Roman revolution, or at least in your eyes, right? He's going to kick out these Romans. You're starting this revolution. It's done. And so Philip doesn't fully get it. Philip said, Lord, show us the Father. In fact, just for our purposes, let's say it this way. Lord, just show us the Father, and that will be enough. Show us the Father. Now, you don't have to show us the way. You don't got to tell us where you're going. Just show us the Father. What he means by this, if you remember, if you remember maybe some of Israelite history, there's this section of Israelite history where their leader, like probably their main leader, the George Washington of Israelite history, right? Moses encounters God in a burning bush. And he hears God's voice, and he wants to see God. And he says, God, let me see you. Let me see you in your glory. Let me see your face. And God responds, no, you can't see my face. It's too much for you. But God lets him see kind of his back, and even that kind of blows Moses away and makes his facial hair turn gray forever after that, right? It's a real cool event. Keep that in mind. Lord, show us the Father, and that will be enough for us. He's asking for one of those moments. Jesus says, you don't get it. You don't get it, Philip. Look what he says next. Jesus answered, don't you know me, Philip? Don't you know me, Philip? Even after I have been among you such a long time, I've been teaching you, I've been showing you all this stuff you need to know, I've been walking through all these things with you, you've heard me preach and teach day after day after day, you've been so close to me that the dust from my feet gets up on you and your clothes. Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. Don't you get it, Philip? Anyone who's seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? You've seen me, you've seen the Father. Why are you asking to see the Father? All you need to do is look at me. I and the Father are one. See, Jesus isn't saying God looks like me. God is a man and has a beard and wears a robe or anything like that. That's not what Jesus is saying. Jesus is saying, if you want to know what God is like, look at what I'm like. If you want to know what God's like, look at what I'm like. So the question then is, what is Jesus like? What is Jesus like? And if we were to think long enough, if we were to think about it, we'd probably think of a few things. And I've got a few that just come to mind as you study the life of Christ and you look at his personality, look what he's all about. One of the first things I think anybody would say about Jesus is he's miraculous, right? He does miracles. He performs these miracles and does all this cool stuff. So feeding thousands of people with just a picnic basket, walking on water, healing the blind, helping those who can't walk to begin walking, raising people from the dead. He is miraculous. That is like to the very core of who Jesus is. He does things that normal human beings cannot do. That's why they're classified as miracles. Jesus is miraculous. What we also learn about Jesus is that he cares for people. We know that Jesus cares for people. We see times where there's a woman who's leading out the funeral procession of her son, her only son, who's died that day. And Jesus takes pity on her. He sees someone with leprosy, someone that the rest of society has cast off, and Jesus walks up to him and hugs him. Even though he knows what everybody else is going to say, he knows everybody else is going to find that to be a scandalous moment, he walks up to this guy with leprosy, wraps his arms around him. He cares for people. He says things like, hey, you need to go take care of the poor. You need to look out for widows. You need to look out for orphans. He cares for people. We also know he's a great teacher, just from things like the Sermon on the Mount. If you ever go read through Matthew 5 through 7, you go read this incredible message. Everybody says it's one of the greatest messages of all time. Maybe not everybody, just this guy. Everybody on the stage thinks that. But most scholars would say this is Jesus' most important sermon ever. And he really lays out a lot of what he thinks. And in it he says things like, blessed are the poor. Blessed are the meek. And he tells his followers and anybody else listening, they aren't to do an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth any longer. He's telling people to love their enemies. Pray for those who would persecute them. He says, don't take oaths. Just be a person that your integrity is unassailable. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. Jesus is this amazing teacher, not just in the Sermon on the Mount, but throughout the Gospels. Some of the things he says is like take care of the poor, feed the poor, clothe the naked, visit people who are sick, visit people who are in prison. Right? Look out for people on the margins of society. Take care of them. Why? Because we already said Jesus cares for people. So all three of those is great. But Jesus is also holy. Right? He's holy. At some point he starts saying things like that allude to him being God. Allude to him being other and different than regular teachers. He teaches and he preaches from the beginning with authority. Not like the scribes and the Pharisees of the day would have expected him. He's holy. He's sinless. Nobody can say a bad word about him. Nobody can find a real sticking accusation against him other than things they trumped up, other than things that make them mad about him because he doesn't fit into their neat little category of who the Messiah is supposed to be. He's holy. Now, all four of these are great. All four of these are great. And they define Jesus really well. But there's one more thing that Philip doesn't know about yet in the context of our story that you and I, we know a little bit about. One of the defining things about Jesus, what Jesus is like, and ultimately what the Father is like, the cross. The cross. You think about the cross. This is one of the defining things about Jesus. Jesus is holy, Jesus is loving, he's a great teacher, he's miraculous and all of that. And he could have used all of that to his advantage. But instead, he chose to go to the cross to pay the penalty for sin for you and for me. Self-sacrificial love. That's what Jesus is like. That's what the Father is like. Ultimately, we've got to remember those things. So here's what I want you to remember. If you don't remember anything else today, I want you to remember this. God is mystery, but somehow God still saves us. We can't figure out God completely. We can't nail down exactly how God did it. We can't always totally get it wrapped around our brains or anything like that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, what we know, God may be mystery, but somehow God still saves us. God still makes a way for us. God still steps in. So I think it's helpful for us to maybe go back to the description and the definition from Pope Paul VI. Mystery is this. It's a reality imbued with the hidden presence of God. It's a reality imbued with the hidden presence of God. And the question we start asking is, where am I seeing God all along? Or maybe, where do I see things like these take place? The miraculous, the caring for people, Sermon on the Mount, holy. Where are you seeing those things happen? Because wherever you see those things happening, you're seeing this hidden reality of God popping up. Maybe it's been a while since you've seen a miracle, but I would suggest to you that modern medicine is miraculous in and of itself. Think of the things we can do. Think of the things that God has empowered us and allowed us to know that can keep people alive when just 50 years ago they would have died. Think about the people you see that care for others. That's a picture of God, right? Think about the Sermon on the Mount. Think about these incredible teachings. Where have you heard these incredible teachings about God and what God is after and about how we're supposed to take care of each other? But where have you heard all of those things? Right? Those are places where this hidden reality of God is coming into full force. Right? Where have you seen the holy? Where have you seen the cross, the self-sacrificial love? See, when you see those things, you're seeing these fingerprints of God. See, the truth is that for some people, you may be the evidence that there is a God. You may be the evidence of what God is really and truly like. Maybe somebody got a really messed up version of who God has told to them at a young age. Maybe they experienced something in church or experienced something from a well-meaning Christian that really messed them up in their orientation towards God for a long time. But what if I told you this? You can be the evidence of what God is really and truly like for them. What a responsibility. What a responsibility. And if that's the case, you and I should live accordingly. We should live like Jesus. I think many of us, if not most of us, we can point to moments in our life, though, where these things weren't really enough. Like just seeing somebody else doing these incredible things weren't really enough. We needed God in that moment. We needed God to step in. We needed God to interject God's self into everything. And then God did. God showed up in a way that maybe we were hoping for, but we didn't really expect. God showed up in a way that maybe we can't really explain it in any other way except that it was God showing up and stepping in. And some other people might call it a lucky break. Some other people might call it good luck or something like that. But we know when we really sit and think about it that it was just God showing up. Sometimes that's just how it is. Now other people might call it good luck, a lucky break. But we know it was God showing up because we were looking for God to show up. When we really parse everything out, move everything away, step back and go, wait a second, that was God. And usually it happens through one of a couple of ways, right? Maybe it's this providential relationship I've got with somebody else. I moved to a new town, or I moved into a new neighborhood, or I started a new job, and there was this person there. And they invited me to church, and I got involved in that church family. And when I went through a hard time, that church family really came around me and loved me well and helped raise my kids well. And when this really bad thing happened in my life, they were there for me. And I don't know how I would have made it without them. Or maybe you had a relationship with somebody where if it wasn't for them, you don't know where you'd be. I can't tell you how many friends I've got. They met their significant other, and they were headed down the wrong path, but that significant other kind of put a halt to that. It's God showing up. Or maybe for you, it's more of a pivotal circumstance sort of situation. A pivotal circumstance. You prayed and you prayed and you prayed. You didn't really expect God to do something, but God somehow came into the middle of that situation. Maybe it was like a medical healing. I mean, those still happen, people. Those still happen. There's somebody in this room, I know, that's happened to them. You probably know somebody in your family and say, I don't know, there's really no other explanation. Whatever it is. There are times in our life I think we still come up against where the only explanation is God stepped in and we finally got a good look. Which leads me back to the story. At the end of How to Catch a Mermaid, they finally get themselves into a little bit of trouble. They get themselves into a little bit of trouble as they're trying to trap this mermaid. They get down there and there's sharks. And as you know, in children's books, sharks are always going to eat you. Maybe. And so they get stuck behind some sharks. And these sharks are going to get them. And they have no hope. And then all of a sudden, the mermaid emerges out of the shadows, gets rid of the sharks, and saves them. And the last page of the book is them waving goodbye to the mermaid as she dives back into the water. And as I was reading this book with my kids, I thought to myself, they only saw the mermaid there. They only saw the mermaid there because they were looking for the mermaid. They only ended up seeing the mermaid in that sense because they were looking. So what I want to suggest to you is if you want to see God, if you want to know God, you got to start looking for God. If you want to know the way to get to God, look to Jesus. Look to Jesus. It can be hard to see God when you aren't looking for God. So what I want to challenge you to do today is this. Look for Jesus. Would you let me pray for you real quick? Would you bow your head and close your eyes wherever you're at? Maybe you're here this morning and you said, man, I've been looking for God for a long time, and I want to find him. I want to know more about God. I want to dedicate my life to knowing God for the first time. If that's you, would you slip your hand up? I'm not going to ask you to come up here or anything. Would you slip your hand up real quick just so I can be praying for you this week? Amen. I see that hand. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Maybe you're here today and you say, man, I'm struggling. I'm struggling, and I need the Lord to step into my situation right now. Nobody knows, and maybe a few people know, but I need God to step in. Would you slip your hand up and then put it right back down? Thank you. I see that hand. Absolutely. I see those hands. Thank you. Lord, I pray that you would show up as only you can. I pray that you would reveal yourself to us as we look for you. Help us to be the people. Help us to be the people who show the world what you're really like. Help those of us who call ourselves followers of Jesus to show the world what you're really, really like, that you are miraculous, that you care for people, that you are wise and that you are holy, and that you are self-sacrificial. Help us to be those people in this world. I pray for my friends who raise their hands. Lord, reveal yourself to them in a way and help us as a church to keep pointing them towards you. Help us always to remember that it is always and only about Jesus. It's in his name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you for joining us.